Hey, I'm Connor with Dielectric, and today I'm going to be going over how to fill the Dielectric Optiload. First thing you're going to want is safety glasses, and we're going to want gloves because we're working with coolant. And this is also an electrical hazard, so when it's plugged in, don't have the control box open or anything like that. So first we're going to be powering it up. I have a C19 plug with 240 volts. This just goes in the side panel here. Once it's plugged in, we can flip the front switch. And the first thing we're going to want to note is the fault light will come on because there's no pressure in it. And I'm also going to be using the Dielectric Optiviewer program to connect to the PLC and to see all the data for it. The first thing I'm going to do, or I already did, was take off the front panel. There's 6 5/32 Allen screws around the whole thing. You're going to want to take the front panel off to view the inlet port. That's where we're going to be pumping the coolant in. And everything we need for it is on the side panel here. The left button is to power up the pump. Whenever it's pressed, the pump will turn on, and we use that to cycle coolant through it and get air out. The button to the right will turn the fan and the pump on as a self-test to make sure everything's working. Make sure not to press these buttons while it's dry because we don't want to hurt the pump. The switch under that is an Ethernet cable. I'm using this to connect to the PLC right now to view the data. So you can just plug a laptop in and open the program. And the two cables under that are both your interlocks. They both open at the same time for any issues with the system. And the plug under that is the power. These are all the tools I have for this. All these parts are listed out in the instruction manual, or you can buy a kit from us if you need to, with all these exact same parts. The first thing we're going to need is 2 bleeder hoses that go on the outlet of the load. These cycle the coolant out of the system once you put it in. These are 1/8 NPT fitting to 1/4 inch hose. We also have this kit here that connects to the input. It is a hydraulic quick connect. It's got a pressure gauge on it so we can get the system up to the right pressure. It's got a ball valve, and that goes into 1/2 inch tubing. This goes into from our pump, which is just a Pentair pump that has a 60 PSI cutoff. That PSI cutoff is very important. If you go over 75 PSI, the unit has a blow-off valve that it'll shoot out of if it goes over that, so you need the cutoff. And then we also have our bucket with our coolant in it, and we'll just have all the tubes going into that, and that'll cycle it through the system. Next, we'll set this up, and we'll fill it. Now we're going to be filling the unit. I've connected the 1/4 inch tubes to the top of the load. You got to use your 1/8 NPT to hose fittings and remove the caps that we ship them with. And you're also going to open the 2 valves on the top of the load because that will circulate the coolant back into this bucket after we pump it in. Make sure this valve here is open. And if you're using the kit we have, you can connect this side of the pressure gauge onto the inlet. Once that's connected, make sure you open the ball valve here, and we'll be ready to turn it on. So let me plug the pump in. So you should see after about 5 to 10 seconds, we'll see coolant circulating back out the other side. So now it's coming out. We let it circulate for a while until you don't see any more air bubbles coming out of these tubes. After all the air is out of it, we're going to close the valves on the top of the load on the side panel. And this is going to build pressure. We want to get it to around between 25 and 30 PSI. This pump is designed to cut off at 60, so pump's not working anymore. We're going to want to shut this valve off and then turn the pump off. And then to bring the pressure back down to 30 or 25, we can use the 2 outlets on the top of the load and just open them slightly until this pressure gauge reads 30. So right there, so we can close it. And now the system's good to go. We want to close this valve now, and we can remove the quick connect. And then we just remove the these two tubes that come on the output of the load, and you want to make sure to put the caps back in so it doesn't shoot out if someone opens the valve. So now that we've filled the unit, we can see that the green light is now on, and using the OptiViewer program, we can see that it's at 28 psi. You're going to want to cycle the pump 5 times over 10 minutes. This is just to get air out. There's a bleeder valve at the top, and this just cycles the air out of the system. And you're just going to put your front panel on, and then the unit will be good to go. So if you have any other questions, just contact Dielectric and we'll help you out.